Hi everyone, I'm Lisa and welcome to Lisa's Stamp Studio. I'm using the Bubble Over Bundle today for a really cute and interesting card. It's really not something I can describe, so I want to give you a quick look at it. I'm going to be using some vellum and teaching you some tips on how to get that pouring technique using watercolor paper and a resist. You're going to be able to find pictures and cutting dimensions for today's project over on my blog. If you're here visiting from YouTube, you'll be able to find the link right in the description bar below, making it easy for you to navigate. There you'll be able to find supplies as well. The products are all available in my online store, and I offer exclusive and generous online ordering rewards. If you don't already have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator and would like a copy of the current occasions catalog and the annual catalog, I'd be happy to send you complimentary copies. Just go ahead and leave me a comment down below. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started on today's project. Here's the card we're going to be creating today. We're going to be doing an embossed resist technique here on the watercolor paper. You're going to see here that I used a larger bottle that is part of the Bottles and Bubbles framelits. And I've taken out the smaller one today. I thought it would be fun to show you an alternative to the card that I created here. And the only difference is actually just the size of the bottle. You can see that this one is just a little bit shorter and a little bit fatter. I'll just give you another idea on how to use these amazing framelits. Let's go ahead and get started. I have a piece of crushed curry cardstock. You're going to find the pictures and the cutting dimensions for today's project over on my blog. If you're here from YouTube, I've provided a link down in the description bar below, making it easy for you to find. I just used my bone folder to get that nice crisp edge on the base of the card, and we're going to set that aside to use later. I'm going to start with a small piece of Whisper White cardstock scrap, and I'm going to bring in the Memento ink. This is my black ink of choice when I'm using photopolymer. And from that coordinating stamp set to those framelits I just showed you, this is the set called Bubble Over. Isn't this adorable? So these images are all going to be able to be cut out using the coordinating framelits that are included when you purchase it as a bundle. You can purchase them separately. So I've pulled out Have a Birthday Brew. I'm going to ink that up in my Memento ink, and I'm going to stamp that on my scrap cardstock because I'm going to be using a framelit to cut that label out. I've got my Big Shot here with the magnetic platform. That is my preference when I'm using framelits to help hold them in place. I'm putting one of the clear cutting mats on the bottom, and I've got a piece of vellum cardstock. That's what's going to create the bottle. And of course that piece of Whisper White cardstock that we just stamped on. I'm going to be using that alternative shaped bottle on that vellum, so that's going to die cut that. Inside the framelits, you're going to find that there's different sized pieces, including caps, depending on the size bottle that you're going to use. And you'll see this is the smaller one. So that's the one I'm going to be using for the label here. Now, if you're having trouble like I am, see how it's slipping? That happens when the acrylic plates start to bow. If you don't interchange them regularly, meaning what's on the bottom is on the top, and then what's in the front is in the back, this is what happens, they start to bow. But here's a tip for you. I've got a Post-it note. So once I have it exactly where I want it, especially when the framelit is a tight fit like this, because it's going to cut it out just perfectly, I'm going to anchor that down in place with the Post-it note. And then I'll cover this with another clear mat to protect it, and then we'll crank it through the Big Shot. All the popping that you hear is completely normal. And we've got our little label here, and then of course we've got our die cut bottle here. I'm going to bring in a piece of black cardstock here. That'll make it easier for you to see that piece of vellum. We're actually going to be doing some coloring on this in order to make it look like there's beer in the bottle. So I'm going to grab my crushed curry ink pad. I'm going to flip that over and give that a squeeze. And I'm going to open it up. And you're going to see that created a pool of ink inside the lid. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my aqua painter to apply that color. Both sides of the vellum are identical, so it really doesn't matter which one that you use. So I'm going to start by taking the cap off my aqua painter. I give it a little pinch to make sure that it's not soaking wet. You need it damp, but you don't want it soaking wet. And I'm going to start by painting the color inside this bottle. So I'm going to tip this a little bit. And you're going to see here, I'm going to put a little bit more color here at the bottom. And then I'm going to start to drag it up. Now, it's not important to be neat, because when water pulls out of a bottle, it never comes out neatly. It always kind of just runs out. So you want those jagged areas. You want areas that look like they're higher and lower than others.
Now, it's not uncommon for the vellum to bow a little bit, so if yours is bowing, that's fine. I want to make sure that I'm providing color around the edges because I don't want it to appear white. I'm going to hold this over my Stampin' Scrub, which is right off camera, and I'm going to squeeze it so that the water will run through the bristles to clean the tip. I'm going to set that aside because we're going to use that again in just a minute on the base of the card. And you can see that that curling I talked about is happening here. Now you're going to need to let this dry, but I'm going to speed up the process using my heat tool. I'm going to use a pair of tweezers that I have to help me hold this. Although mine are metal, they will not conduct heat to the tip. So if you're going to use something that's metal, please make sure you're not going to burn your fingers. 2 speeds on the heat tool. I'm going to come all the way up to 2, so it's on high. Also, what's going to happen is it's going to help straighten out the vellum. The vellum is very thin, so it's not going to take much. That looks good. And then we'll go ahead and release that. And then you can see here now we have our bottle. Here is that label that we die cut. You can see it's pretty small, so I'm going to bring in my silicone craft sheet to apply adhesive on the back. And the reason I do this is because adhesive will not stick on the mat like it would on my work surface. So if I get a little bit over the edges, I don't have to worry about it marring this area as I begin to finish my project. Now, a bottle does typically go straight up and down, so I'm going to make sure that my label matches the same way, just mimicking the sides. And then adhering that. This is watercolor paper, and this is where we're going to be doing our embossing and our coloring. Now, in order to get an idea on placement, I'm just going to hold my bottle here, and I'm going to take my greeting, which I actually took from another stamp set. Don't be afraid to borrow from one to use for another, and this comes from the stamp set, You've Got Style. I've absolutely thought that this greeting was perfect for this. Hope your birthday is as bubbly as you are. Happy birthday. So you can see I'm going to probably want it about center. I'm going to prepare the surface for embossing. So I'm going to use my embossing buddy to wipe over the card base. The anti-static powder in here will actually tell the embossing powder not to stick where I don't put ink. That'll help eliminate all those small flecks of color when you heat emboss. I'm going to emboss my words in white, so I'm going to use the Whisper White Craft ink pad. This is great for heat embossing because it's slow to dry. Also going to bring in my powder, and I use a coffee filter to make it real easy for me to pour it back in the jar. So I've got my white ink pad here, and I'm going to ink that up, checking it to make sure I don't have ink along the edges, and I'm going to place that down here at the bottom. Now, I know you can't see it because it's white on white, but we're going to go ahead and powder that. So I'm going to take off the lid, and I'm going to sprinkle that generously with embossing powder. Dump the rest in there. I'm going to give it a quick cursory look to make sure it looks like it's covered, and it is, and I'll set that aside. Now we're going to come back in with the heat tool on high speed again, and what we're going to do is we're going to set this powder. My gun is still warm since I used it just recently on the vellum, but this will take a little bit longer to dry than on normal cardstock because watercolor paper is very porous. It's meant to hold a lot of water. Start in one small area at a time until you see that powder turn to like a glossy enamel finish. Again, I know it's difficult to see, but I promise you it's there, and it's going to pop in just a second when we add that color. So we're going to go back to that crushed curry ink pad. I'm going to take a quick look. Yeah, I think I've got enough color in there already. Another tip for you, I have a little bit of a grit here from that embossing powder. So I'm using a Swiffer, and I'm going over it. These Swiffers are wonderful to help pick up all that little stray embossing powder. So I've got my ink here off to the side. I'm going to bring my bottle in, and I'm going to kind of position this so I know where it's going to start to pour from. The bowing of the watercolor paper is normal, so don't think that you've done something wrong. So I can see here that my bottle is going to come, about here. So I'm going to want to start my drip of color right around here. So I'm just going to get a little idea of placement, put a little ink there, and I'm going to start to run this down. There is no rhyme or reason to this. All you're going to do is you're going to lay color down generously over that area. I'm kind of looking to kind of make a pool of color as if it had poured out, going back and forth over that embossing. The darker it is, the better your words are going to show up. So I'm just going to kind of stretch that out. Also, too, as it dries, you can go back and create another layer of color that'll give it a little bit of a more realistic texture. And again, Nothing ever pours out perfectly, right? So we're going to go ahead and give this a little bit of movement here by providing some little bumps along the top and the bottom. And I'm going to stretch out a little bit of color here. And then I'm going to line my bottle back up. I just want to make sure that that's going to look right. That looks pretty good. I'm going to fill that in. And again, I'm checking. So you can see now as the paper starts to dry, there's going to be some areas that are lighter and darker. Okay, so we're done with our ink pad. I'll close that up. Same thing, you're going to squeeze this over your Stampin' Scrub so that water in here will run through the bristles to clean it off. And then I'm just going to go over this very quickly to make sure that it's dry. And again, that gun is nice and hot. I want to do that because I'm going to be adhering that vellum piece, and I want to make sure that there's no dampness left on this paper. You don't want to overheat this because otherwise those words will not appear raised. They'll appear scorched and flat. All right, so now we're ready to adhere this vellum piece. I've brought the silicone craft sheet back in, and I'm going to be using the liquid glue. This is a very strong glue. It typically does not dry clear, but it's going to work really well on vellum with a tip I'm going to give you about using the sponge. So I'm going to put a dollop of glue there. And the great thing about this is as this dries, I can just rub it right off my silicone craft sheet and it won't leave a sticky surface. In a Tupperware container, I keep airtight a piece of a sponge. And the reason I do that is so that I can reuse them. They won't dry out. I put a binder clip on it to make it easier to handle with my hands. And I'm actually going to separate that glue a little bit to kind of make a thin palette. And then I'm going to lay the back side up so that I can add some glue here. It's sticky, very strong like I said, so you don't need to go over it too many times. I'm going to set that aside. That's finished. And then here we are with that base image that we just did, and I'm going to make sure that I center this of how it's going to come out of the bottle. You can see I'm right close to the edge here. Flip it upside down and I'm going to rub just to secure that vellum in place. And now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add adhesive to the back side, and I'm going to be a lot more generous than I typically am. You can use tear and tape or fast fuse if you'd like. And I want to make sure that that bowed paper is really not going to bow when it comes back here on that crushed curry base of our card. And I'm just going to line that up, giving myself a border all the way around. And then one more time I'm going to flip from the back, just in case there's any ink on my fingers. I won't get it on the front of my card. But there we go. Isn't that cute? And it's really simple, and it's a great guy card. Just think that you can use a brown tone, so this could be a soda of any flavor if you wanted Coke or Dr. Pepper, or orange for an orange crush, or Mountain Dew. Just vary the colors. So the one created today with the smaller bottle and the one I created before you joined me with the larger bottle. Very similar in appearance and a real fun and simple technique. Remember to head over to my blog. There you'll find the pictures and cutting dimensions. And if you don't already have copies of the current Stampin' Up! Catalogs, I'd be happy to send you complimentary ones. Just leave me a comment. Thanks so much for joining me, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.